Hello BookTube. Today for Tag Tuesday, I'm going to be doing the best and worst of 2022 so far. This tag was created by Britta Bowler, and I will leave a link to her original video in the show notes down below. Before I get started, I am going to be adding 2 categories to the 7 that Britta created. I'm going to be adding Best Poetry Collection and Best Reread. So as far as the categories are concerned, I'm going to be, except for Best Reread, all of the choices will be books that I have read for the first time in 2022. This is also a similar principle I used for my 10 best books last year. They were all new to me. Also, for the worst books, there are 2 categories that are most disappointing or biggest disappointment and worst book. These 2 are also ones that I have finished. I bill heavily, and I'm not going to try to parse that. So it's the worst book and the most disappointing book that I finished in 2022 so far. So let's get going with the categories. So category number 1, Best Novel. As has been... So for the past few years, I haven't really gotten on with fiction. It's largely been since I started interacting with BookTube, but certainly since I started being an active booktuber, making videos. I've not had the best success with fiction. I still try, and those moments when I click with a book, with a novel, or a short story collection, are absolutely wonderful and magical. And the best novel by far that I've read in 2022 is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. This is a novel set in contemporary Britain, although there are a few flashbacks to earlier decades in the 20th century. It's about 11 women and 1 non-binary individual who are connected by a play that the first protagonist is writing and directing. I absolutely loved this book. It was an amazing reading experience, and is by far the best book I've read, or novel I've read in 2022. Although that's not saying much, because again, I haven't really had much success with the fiction I've read the past few years. Category number 2, Best Character. For this, I'm going to go with 2 characters who are very closely intertwined, and I'm going to go with a manga series, A Toilet Bound Hanako-kun by AidaIro. So my 2 best characters that I've encountered in 2022 so far are Ko and Mitsuba. This is Ko, and this is Mitsuba. A Toilet Bound Hanako-kun is a manga series set in Japan about a very haunted school. One day, a student, Nene, is told that if she goes to a specific toilet stall, performs a set ritual, she will be able to summon the spirit known as the Toilet Bound Hanako-san and be granted a wish. Nene goes to the stall, she performs the ritual, and she summons Hanako-san. Although, unlike in the traditional version of the story, this particular Hanako-san is actually the ghost of a young man. And since he's younger than Nene, he's therefore Hanako-kun. Amane, Hanako-kun, grants Nene her wish. It does not go well, and Amane rescues her. In exchange, Nene becomes Amane's assistant, initially cleaning the bathroom where his stall is, and then later aiding him in his duties, regulating the relationships between the living and the supernaturals at the school. There are 7 mysteries at this school, of which Amane, as the Hanako-san, is the 7th and has a regulatory authority over the other 6, as well as the other hunt supernaturals at the school. To round out, to add a third character, Ko is a young trainee exorcist who initially tries to exorcise Amane, but later becomes friends with both Amane and Nene and joins the two on their adventures. One day, Ko meets the ghost of a young man named Mitsuba, who was a classmate of Ko's the year before. Over the course of a day, the two hit it off in a wonderful storyline in Volume 4 that ends tragically. Kara, thanks to the series' big bad, or at least the big bad so far, Amane's little shit of a twin brother, Tsukasa, who's also a ghost. Later, Tsukasa manipulates a new form of Mitsuba into becoming the third mystery, and that reintroduces Mitsuba and Ko. And then later in a succeeding storyline, the two are trapped in an alternate reality. And that is an amazing storyline. And I love both of these characters. They are just so wonderful. So that's my choice for Category 2. Category 3 is Best Nonfiction Book. Now, unlike with Best Novel, Best Nonfiction is going to give me some trouble because I've had, the past few years, my reading attentions have moved more to nonfiction. I've enjoyed nonfiction far more than I have fiction, and oftentimes the nonfiction I've read has been amazing and wonderful, and it is incredibly hard to choose just one. And that's what I've had with this so far. One choice I love, and I've loved it since I've read it, but another choice is one that I just read, and I'm still processing it, and I don't know necessarily if the second choice will eventually usurp my first choice or not. That will probably come at an end of year version of this tag, or if I do a top 10 nonfiction books, which would just be top 10 books, period, and they just all happen to be nonfiction. But anyway, let's get going. So, my first choice for the best nonfiction book that I've read in 2022 is South to Freedom by Alice L. Baumgartner. This is a history about how slaves in Texas fled to Mexico in search of freedom. Mexico at this time, shortly after the Texas Rebellion, outlawed slavery and became very much an emancipatory republic, where if runaway slaves made it to Mexico, they were free. There were a number of conditions, but for the most part, Mexico was strongly abolitionist. And Baumgartner looks at sort of how this came about, both in the United States and in Mexico, the relations between the two, the pressures to try to limit Mexico's abolitionism, as well as a number of stories set in sort of North Mexico where runaway slaves who found freedom and a place in the community were kidnapped by their former owners, and how the residents of the towns that they made lives in actually stood up and sort of rescued their fellow town residents. It's an amazing book. I really enjoyed it. My second choice for the best nonfiction book that I've read so far in 2022 is one that I just read a few days ago, and that is Blood on the River by Marjoleine. This is the history of the 1763 to 1764 slave rebellion on the Berbice River. It was a colony of the Dutch in what is now Guyana. And this is an amazing, amazing triumph of scholarship and research. It's about a little known colony, and the rebellion, though it failed, ultimately sort of presaged the much more successful Haitian rebellion and revolution that happened scarcely 50 years later. This is a really good book as well. Category number 4, the weirdest book I've read so far in 2022. I'm going to be merging this one with number 5, biggest surprise, because the book that is both the weirdest and the most surprising is the same book. And that is Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, translated by Sophie Hughes. This is a Mexican novel about the murder of a transgendered witch. And it's basically the story of one of her murderers. And it's weird and dystopic and at times deeply disgusting. And you would think, and I would have thought, I really would not have gotten into this book at all. But it is so surprising that I did, that I like it as well as I do. It's just, the most surprising and weirdest book I've read so far in 2022. So now the last two categories that Britta created are the more negative categories. So I'm going to hold those off till the end and add my 2 categories here. So next up is best poetry collection that I've read so far in 2022, and that is First Nights by Niall Campbell. This is a wonderful and amazing collection of poetry that I read. I just recently really got back into reading poetry, and I've amassed a small collection of poetry collections from university presses, primarily Princeton's Poet Collection. So, really good. And my next edition is best reread so far of 2022, and there is no question that this that my answer to this category, or really the best reread I've had so far of 2022, is my massive reread of Fullmetal Alchemist by Hiromu Arakawa. Fullmetal Alchemist is one of the most popular manga series of the last 20 years. It's the story of the Elric brothers, Edward and Alphonse, who are prodigy alchemists who, in an attempt to resurrect their deceased mother, perform human transmutation, a forbidden alchemical operation or transmutation that backfires and rebounds on the brothers. Edward loses a leg. Alphonse loses his body to save Alphonse's life. Edward sacrifices an arm to transcribe Alphonse's soul onto a suit of armor. A year later, and with automail prosthetics that are fully functional, Edward takes the state alchemist exam and becomes a state alchemist for the country of Amestris. and it's part of the state military, and Edward is giving the moniker Fullmetal Alchemist. The brothers go in pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone, an alchemical artifact reputed to be able to bypass the laws of transmutation and the equivalent exchange, and allow the brothers to restore their bodies. As the brothers search for the stone, they discover that it's real and the truth behind it, and also a long-running conspiracy that goes to the very heart of and very foundations of a mistress, and that sees both brothers as important human sacrifices for the promised day. I love Fullmetal Alchemist. It is one of my favorite manga series, and I had a blast reading all 27 volumes in early September. It was absolutely glorious. So now we return to Brita's original category. So the biggest disappointment so far of 2022 is 1000 Years of Manga by Brigitte Koyama-Richard, translated by David Radzinowicz. This book is I guess you could say it's an introduction to manga. Although I think if you were wanting to read this as an introduction to contemporary manga, Japanese comic books, you were likely to be disappointed. Koyama-Richard focuses on a very limited pool of manga that largely refer back to her primary focus, which is more on Japanese art and the history of Japanese art. So I was really disappointed in the text of this book. Although, I mean, really, if you're getting this, you're getting it for the art. The art is admittedly gorgeous. It's just, I guess maybe if the book was more about Japanese art or more about a specific subset of manga that kind of goes back to the core argument rather than trying to be an introduction, maybe this book would have been more successful. But as it stands so far, this is the most disappointing book I've read so far in 2022 that I haven't bailed on. And for the worst book I've read so far in 2022, that has to go to Spider by Katarzyna and Serguisz Michalski. This is part of the animal series from Reaction Books, in which a specific animal is discussed in a variety of ways: biology, natural history, cultural criticism, economic impact, that sort of thing. This book is almost exclusively literary criticism from a Freudian point of view. And I hate Freudian critical theory with the passion of probably 1,000 suns. It's just, no. And some of the Michalski's arguments are just weird and bizarre. And honestly, sometimes arachnophobia is just caused because my grandfather threw a spider into my mother's hair when she was a little girl. Simple as that. There's no audible baloney or any of that. It's just, yeah. This is by far the worst book I've read so far in 2022 that I didn't bail on. So that was the best and worst of 2022 so far. If you would like to do this tag or just talk about the books that have been most successful and least successful for you so far in 2022. Consider yourselves tagged. So anyway, BookTube, thank you. Have a great rest of your evening, since I'm doing this tag rather late, which is why I'm at my desk rather than over in front of my history shelf or shelves. So anyway, BookTube, thank you again. Have a great evening, and I will see you hopefully tomorrow. So until then, thank you and stay safe.